Hello guys, Reset Jet here. Welcome to Atlanta. This will be the first of 4 videos of a full tutorial flight going from cold and dark to pre-flight all the way to engine shutdown using real world procedures on the 757. Now, as I mentioned in the channel update video, I'm still relatively new on the aircraft with about 200 hours total in the type, about 170 on the 75 and 30 on the 76. But regardless, I hope I can teach you all a thing or two about how we operate this aircraft out on the line. Now, we are currently in Atlanta in this beautiful Eastern 757, and before we get started, I think it's worth pausing momentarily to talk about the history of this aircraft, because it's pretty intriguing. Now, the production of the 75 came about as a result of an energy crisis the US had found themselves in back in the mid-1970s. Boeing had a lot of success initially with the 727, but with the rise in oil prices and growing fuel shortages, airlines were really looking for an aircraft that was going to be a little bit more cost effective. Initially, Boeing had thought about stretching the 72 into a version that they would call the Dash 300, but none of the airlines were really interested in that idea. Plus, Airbus had just recently released the A300, and airlines were really intrigued about the idea of twin-engine aircraft instead of tri-engine airplanes. Well, in response to the A300, Boeing had launched the 7X7 program, which would become the 767 program. And since none of the airlines were interested in another version of the 72, Boeing figured they would use the blueprints from the 76 and create a narrow-body version, which became the 757. And that's why both aircraft are so similar to one another, because it essentially uses the same blueprints, we'll say, for both airplanes. And I think about 20 years or so after the 727 was produced, the 75 essentially put it out of production because it essentially outperformed it in like every category. Eastern was the launch customer of the 757, and their inaugural service was from Atlanta to Tampa, which is what we'll be doing today. So, all that being said, we'll go ahead and hop on the aircraft here, and we'll get started. Alright guys, as we hop on board here, I think it's worth mentioning some of the obvious differences between the flight sim world and the real world, some of the things that we have to concern ourselves about that we just don't have to in a flight sim here. Case in point, one of the first things that I do when I hop on board is here by the R1 door in the upper left, we've got a gauge for the potable water. And depending on whether we are on a domestic flight or an international flight, we want to make sure that is filled up to a certain percentage. Another thing is the logbook. Obviously, that's not something we have to worry about here. So when it comes to things like that, I'm just going to omit and just do my best to obviously operate this aircraft as single pilot, because that's kind of the option we're left with here in the flight sim world, whereas we'd be flying this thing with at least one other person in the real world. So all that being said, one of the first things that I do once I actually hop on board is make a right turn, usually by the L2 doors. We obviously board here, but I'll actually head down towards the back end of the aircraft and go over to the overwing exits and take a look at our wings here, because this is probably the best vantage point you can get for taking a look at the upside of the top side of the wings here. So I want to make sure obviously you don't have any damage or anything like that. If you do, you'd want to have that look, you want to have maintenance take a look at it before we get started here. So before I actually go to the front of the airplane, first thing I do is take a look at the overwing exits here and take a look at our wings. After that, we'll make our way back up front, get settled, at least put our bags down here, and the way in which we are going to divide the pre-flight duties here is between the pilot monitoring, which is usually going to be, well, in our case, it's usually going to be the FO for the first flight, and then captain's going to fly the first leg. So we divide the duties between the pilot monitoring and the pilot flying. When it comes to the pilot flying, all they are concerned about is managed in a box here. So they're just going to load the flight plan and initiate ACARs, and that's pretty much it. Whereas the pilot monitoring is going to take care of everything else essentially. So the overhead panel, setting up the MCP, the radio stack, and the P61 panel back here. So that being said, we'll go ahead and hop on board here, and it's not unusual to find the airplane cold and dark, especially if it's a first flight of the day, which is what we're going to pretend this is. It happens on occasion. So in that case, you would obviously want to establish electrical power here. Now the EFB has a pretty good checklist for starting up the airplane here for the power up. Now we'll follow the our company procedures, and it actually matches pretty close to what they've got here. So I'll just go ahead and get started. So first thing we'll do is we'll turn the battery on. After that, we'll switch the standby power to auto, and we do want to see that main battery discharge light illuminate there. From this point, we'll go down to the hydraulic pumps. Now they're off. The or the engine rather driven pumps are the switches are off, but usually they'd be turned on. So I'll go ahead and turn those on here, and then we'll slide down to the landing gear. We want to make sure that's down. Our alternate flap selector is in the norm position, and then we can come back up here and ensure that our bus tie switches are auto. I'm sorry, we would establish electrical power first, and then make sure our bus tie switches are auto. Now at this point, I will go ahead and get the IRS started up. And then I'm going to check and make sure that our quantities are all filled up to the point in which we need them to be. So we want preferably at least about 17 quarts of oil, and at least 1,000 psi for oxygen pressure here. Now 14 is okay so long as once the engines have started, we've got at least 8 quarts minimum once the engines have warmed up. But I'm not going to take any chances here. We'll just go ahead and call maintenance up, and let's go ahead and fill that up to 17. After that, kind of just want to make sure the office is set up the way it needs to be. So for the first flight of the day, we have a few tests that we need to run, and I'll go ahead and put that up on the screen right now. So we've got the GPWS test, the TCAS test, flight deck access system, fire warnings, standby power, and then the observer oxygen masks, as well as crew rest and compartment. So we just want to make sure that we've got a couple of things like the flashlights here, fire extinguisher, things like that on board in the flight deck. So before I do all that, I would go do the walk around, and for today I'm actually just gonna skip that because I'll do that for Bluebird. No offense to Flight Factor, I want to say Bluebird's probably gonna be a little bit more accurate, for a lack of a better word. I think it'll be a little bit more polished. Let's just leave it at that. A little bit more polished when it comes to the external module. Anyway, so once I come back inside, the irises usually should be lined up by then, and in that case we can go ahead and do the GPWS test. Now this doesn't work quite as well as it's supposed to here in the real bird. So in your real airplane, you would flick the switch up for about a second and a half, and you would get just a normal test, whereas in the Fly Factor you've got to flick it up and leave it up for it to run a test. If you were to do that in the real world, it'd go through the entire test, and that's not what we're trying to do here. Let's see, so once a GPWS test is done, we would run through the TCAS test, and I'm not sure this is going to work the way it's supposed to. It says TCAS test here, so it would give you the oral TCAS test, okay, but it hasn't. So once the TCAS test, once the TCAS test is done, we would do the flight deck access system, and that's a whole security thing, so I'm not going to go through that. Essentially, we just want to make sure that the door locks the way it's supposed to and opens when it's supposed to. Next is the fire warning test. Now, this is a technique I like to do. I will cancel out all of the ICAS messages here, and then I'll run a test. When it comes to the wheel well fire test, we're looking for 4 lights and 1 ICAS message. We should have a master warning, 2 master warning lights, the discrete fire warning light over here by the underneath the cancel and recall buttons, and then the wheel well fire light over here should light up as well too. Then we should get a an ICAS wheel well fire caution message. So once we push this, let's see if we can get a good view here. So there are our 4 lights, and it looks like it's a fire warning, I guess. I thought it was a caution message, but I guess it does make sense for it to be a fire warning. So anyway, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 lights and 1 message. And then for the engine fire, and I've done this before, for the engine APU and cargo fire tests, we're supposed to have, let's see here, that is 12 lights and 7 messages, but I know we're missing a few caution messages here on the ICAS. But essentially we're looking for 2 master warnings, the discrete fire warning, fuel control switches, the engine, the left and right engine overheat lights, the engine APU fire handles should light up as well, and then the forward and aft cargo fire switches over here should light up as well. And then for the ICAS messages, we're looking for a left and right engine fire, forward and aft cargo fire, AP fire, and the left and right engine overheat, which I think is what's missing here. So anyway, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lights down there, and this test doesn't run long enough for me to go through all the lights, but we've got another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 up there, and I believe it was 7 down here. 9 down here. So actually I had 17. So yeah, we're missing 2 messages, and I want to say those are the 2 left and right engine overheat caution messages. But anyway, you would run the fire test. After the fire test is the standby power test. Now all we're going to do here is essentially go from standby power to BAT, and depending on which version of the 7.5 you've got, we should see a discharge light here. Some of them are a little bit different, but that's what we want to see. And we'll swing the power back to, or switch back to auto. After that, we'll then test the oxygen mask. We'll test ours, test the observers back there, and Captain eventually is going to get his or hers tested as well too. After that, that's pretty much it for the, that is it. We would check the, make sure we have certain items, and there's a whole list of them printed out here in the flight deck. It's not modeled in Flight Factor here, but there's a whole list of items that we want to make sure are in the flight deck, including the escape ropes, which are, wow, not here as well either. Anyway, After that, what we are going to do is we'll run through the overhead panel and make sure that's set up the way it's supposed to be. So we'll start up in the top left there. We'll make our way down. If you've flown one Airbus, or I'm sorry, one Boeing airplane, then you're pretty familiar with the flow in which we do this. So we'll start up in the top left here. Iris, we'll go to nav. They've already been set in the boxes all to the position. Yaw damper, we'll go to on. Our hydraulic pumps are set the way they're supposed to be. Go back up top. These lights, we should have a few more lights. Our pitot lights should be on in the AOA. So that's not completely modeled the way it's supposed to be. HF radios should be off. Electrical panel here, so battery switch is on. Standby power is auto. APU gen pretty much stays on all the time too. We've already taken care of the external power. Bus tie switches are auto. Utility buses, if you didn't have these on by now, the flight attendants would probably be yapping at you because they don't have any power in the gallery. Our gen lights, those always stay on as well too. The drive disconnects, those always stay guarded. If you were to push on those, then you're gonna have a big problem there. APU will be turned off. We can run the test on the cockpit voice recorder here, which isn't modeled. Floodlight, the panel light, that's all as desired. We'll go back up top. Emergency light, I'll just go ahead and close the guard here because that'll automatically switch the move the switch to the arm position. Rammer turbine, that should be closed, guarded. Same with the passenger oxygen. The engine limiters, if you have those, those should be turned on. The engine start, the way in which we determine this is just by pilot flying. So if the captain's flying, we'll leave that on 1. If the FO's flying, put that on 2. So we'll just leave that on 1. Maintenance is kind of notorious for putting these in the off position. So if that's the case, we'll just put them back to auto. Fuel pump switches, we are going to just ensure that the lights are on. If you were to have the center pumps, those pressure lights would be on as well too, and we would run a test there. And essentially, we just want to make sure that we see the center, the left center, and right center pump light comes on in the ICAS message. But we don't have any center fuel here today. Swing out to anti-eyes, it should be off. Wipers are off. The only light that really should be on here is the position light. So scroll back up. Window heat switches can come to on. Again, the right HF radio, we can leave that off. The cabin here, all this, we can just leave that as is. If they were to call you, kind of like it's modeled here, it turns gray in flight sim, but in our aircraft it turns blue. Just to let you know who's calling. Passenger signs, by this point we would go ahead and turn everything on. For the cabin altitude control, we can just leave that right here, and the auto rate actually should, I do believe it's actually, wow, I'm not entirely sure if that's on min or if it's here in this little arrow. I'm actually gonna have to take a look at that. I'm not entirely sure. The landing altitude should be, let's see here, in Tampa, I think it's roughly, take a look at Navigraph real quick. .26 feet. So we can just round that up to 30. For the mode selector, we can use auto 1. If auto 1 didn't work, we put it auto 2. Cabin, that should really, that should just read the current airport elevation. The equipment cooling should be blank. If you had a problem, it would be using the alternate fan, but that should be blank. Logo light, that's your discretion. Flight deck door would be unlocked. We can then test to make sure all our lights work. If they don't work, usually if you just kind of push on them in and out, it'll work. But if it doesn't, then you have to call maintenance. But check all our lights in the overhead panel, in the MCP, on our EADI and EHSI. it's not modeled here, but it does like this little weird, funky looking matrix stuff and with like numbers and whatnot there. So we just want to make sure those work. Those lights for the gears down on our radio stack here, our radio panel. The what do you call it? The FMCs. And then last but not least, the fuel generator lights here should actually say off, but that doesn't seem to be modeled. But anyway, test those lights, turn that off, and then we'll come up here to the our what do you call it, pneumatic panel. It's pretty hot, 27 degrees. Trim air. We'll turn that on. Recirc fan. Now in our airplanes, the left side is guarded, and that's because the left side actually is the fan that runs the equipment cooling fan down in the equipment cooling bay. So we always want to make sure that's kept on. Now the fan in the right, for the 7.5 anyway, it's not the same case with the 7.6, but for the 7.5, the fan is actually in the back of the aft cargo here. So what we like to do during pre-flight is ensure that that fan stays off, especially if it's warm outside, because if it's warm then and we had that fan on, it would actually suck air from the aft cargo air and cycle it into the aircraft. So we want to make sure that's off while we are on the ground, if we're trying to keep the airplane cool anyway. If we're trying to keep it warm, it's a very good way to warm the aircraft up. For our packs, it should be off on the ground, and the way our panel back here, pneumatic panel, should be set up is the only valve rather that should be open is the isolation valve. And when we work towards the shutdown checklist, you'll see how that ends up the way it is. But that's pretty much it for the overhead panel. After that, we'll slide down to the MCP. Make sure our flight directors are on. The auto throttle, we can turn that on right now. We should be able to arm the LNAV and VNAV as well too, but it doesn't allow us to do that here in this sim. But you should be able to. It just tells you, like what it just said right there, no active route, but it should be able to light up anyway. And then we'll set the runway heading, which is going to be 275 going westbound today, and the initial altitude, which we're just going to leave at 10,000. From here, I like to slide down over towards the right side of the panel here, and make sure my lights are the way I want them set. I'll come down, test my oxygen, and again, there's a certain way in which you test it. So when we test the oxygen, I'll actually pull this panel up and make sure that as I'm testing it, the PSI doesn't drop more than 100%, and then or 100 PSI, and then I'm actually going to write that number down, because when we do the flight control check, we'll make sure that that number hasn't decreased, more than 100 PSI, because that's really the only way we can tell to see if there's a leak. So I'll bring that up again once we are testing the flight control. So we'll test the oxygen, write the number down, and then make sure our instrument source selectors are pretty much all on the right side, or whichever side is required. If you were to have some kind of problem, then it's going to be on another side. So just want to make sure that it's on the appropriate side. Our air data are all on the appropriate side. Otherwise, we'd be using an alternate source. The altimeter is set to field. Sorry, to the whatever the altimeter setting is. I want to say it's 3,000 for today, and then we're gonna bug 1,000 feet, and the reason why is because our acceleration altitude, which I've explained in our in the takeoff tutorial. Slide over to the E80i. I'm just gonna blank out the decision height here, and then this should be able to turn off our auto land status here, but I don't think it'll let me do that. Yeah. So slide down. Just want to make sure things light up the way they're supposed to. Landing gear should have 3 green. Flat position should be where it's supposed to be. Let's see if I can reach over. If the captain hasn't said it already, I'll go ahead and set their altimeter as well too, as well as standby. Slide down to the auto brakes. We can move that to RTO. And then let's see here. I've already checked that. Computer, set that to the center. That should be it. And then I'll blank out skipper's decision height as well too. And then I'll run the weather test here. So we're going to test the weather radar every leg. Yeah, and that's all we're really looking for, this rainbow color. So if your aircraft has predictive wind shear warning, you'll get an oral warning at this time, but realistically that's all we're just looking for here. So once that's done, we'll turn the radar off, and then we'll set our radios. Yeah, whichever way we're supposed to set them. So usually it's going to be ground, tower. If you have another radio back here, we'll set departure, and then it's going to be ops or ramp, and then we'll have guard on the other side here. Last but not least, so that's pretty much it. Go back here to the P61 panel. Now, it doesn't work the way it's supposed to in the real world here, but our takeoff config, this is where we actually test this. You would flick this up and you would get, usually you'll get a flaps and parking brake. Sometimes you get spoilers, and you just have to make sure that your spoiler is all the way in the down position. It doesn't work the way it's supposed to here in the sim. You have to move the throttles up to get the takeoff config to go off. And again, you should just get a flaps and parking brake warning light here. If you had the speed brakes up, with spoilers up rather, you get the spoilers. But again, that's doesn't work how it's supposed to be, how it's supposed to. But the takeoff config and the weather radar are the very first, or the two of the tests that we need to run during every flight. And that's pretty much it for the pre-flight, for the pilot monitoring portion. And then down here we'll want to make sure that the by this time, yeah, the captain should have the box set up. So we would just make sure that the box is set up the way it's supposed to, and the captain will make sure that overhead's set up the way it's supposed to. So with the power of editing, I'll go ahead and put our flight plan in here, and we'll go from there. Alright guys, got the flight plan in here now. We verified all the fixes, matches with the paperwork, and I'm happy with the fuel we should have at the destination here. So we're all good to go there, and also have the numbers set here. So our V1 is going to be 130 today, VR is 137, our V2 is bugged up here on the MCP at 144. L9 and V9 are now armed. So at this point, all we really have to do is just brief the departure, and we are going to be on our way. So we'll just briefly talk about the weather here, and go through the departure route, and that's pretty much it. So the weather today, it's mostly clear skies, light winds out of the west. Altimeter is 3,000. We've got that set on both sides here. For the departure, we'll be taxiing back from Tango 1. Expect to take Lima, Juliet, Mike, down to Lima Charlie for 27 right. Roughly 12,390 feet of runway. It's going to be on the Bang 3 departure, RNF to Slaw. We're limited to 250 knots at Rivet, and we are asked to accelerate to 250 knots, and just the Vice Tower if we're unable to, going up to 10,000 feet initially. And that's pretty much it, guys. So in the next video, we'll go ahead and start the engines up, taxi out to the runway, and make our way over to Tampa. So stay tuned.